Hi guys, welcome to my studio. Today is episode 5 in our Watercolor Florals series, and we are going to paint a lilac from start to finish. So grab a brush and join me. All right, let's talk supplies. I am using hot pressed paper from Canson. Hot pressed is really nice and smooth, but it still allows lots of water to soak into that paper, so you don't get that weird buckling that you do with thin papers. I'm using my koi set from Sakura. I've got 2 glasses of clean water, and then for brushes, what do I have here? I've got a round brush. This is a number 4 round brush. Round brushes come to a nice fine point, but they hold lots of paint in the body, or the belly. I always call it the body. And then I have this brush. I'm not really sure what kind of brush this is, but it's just sort of this funny little thick brush that comes, again, to a nice fine point. And then I've got 2 small round brushes, a 0 and a number 1. So we've got large brushes for doing washes and color mixing, and then we've got some smaller detail brushes for all those fine details. Now I'm going to start by mixing up a nice purple, maybe a few varying shades of purple. And of course I'll use 1 glass of water for the purples and 1 for my greens. You always want to add lots and lots of water into your paints. I mean, how much water you actually add is totally up to you. Some people work with a more concentrated watercolor. You never want them to be thick like acrylics. And some people like me like to work with very watery paints. Now I'm going to mix up, as I said, a couple different varying shades of purple. And having those mixed up ahead of time is going to help me to just paint the lilac more naturally. As a flower has varying shades of color, I want to have those shades mixed up on my palette. So just adding a little extra pink to these, to 1 purple, and maybe a little extra bluey color to another purple. Of course I can mix as I go. We can mix as we go as well, but it's nice to have a good start. And you might want some areas on your palette where the paint is more translucent, so lots more water, and some areas where it is more saturated or opaque. Not that watercolors are ever opaque, but you've got some varying areas there right on the palette. So what I want to do is make sure I have a nice clean brush, and I am going to take some water, or water basically, that is very, very lightly colored with a little bit of paint, and I just want to map out where on this page I am going to place this lilac. Now lilacs are made up of these tiny blooms that are all part of this larger shape of the flower, which is sort of conical, I guess. So I hope you can see that. And I guess what I'm doing here is to start with the actual painting and overall design of the lilac. I am leaving some little negative space areas here and the bottom. And this is just the stuff that you get used to as you paint over the course of years, but the bottom of the lilac is the paint is a little more saturated, because I know I'm gonna put some of the darker blossoms down there. And for the top of the lilac shape, I'm basically just using my purple water. I want it very, very light. And I've left some negative space here as well. So I am just mapping that out. Very, very light paint. I want it to dry quite quickly. But the most important thing is just that I get a vague shape of that lilac blossom mapped out. And that is what I'm doing. Lilacs always make me think of that Patti Smith song, Piss Factory. It's a good song if you haven't heard it. Love Patti Smith. Okay, so I've basically got my overall lilac shape there. And now what I want to do is lilacs, you know, they look quite complicated when you see the finished product, but they are actually so fun to paint. And I'm going to switch over to a smaller brush, probably not for the whole thing, but just to get started and get the hang of things. And I'm going to start painting these little tiny blossoms. And all you want is for some of they have 4 petals actually. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. They have 4 petals, these little blossoms, and you want some of those petals to be darker and some of them to be lighter. And right now, mine are bleeding a little bit into the wet area. That's called wet into wet painting, when you are painting on top of an area that's already wet. And that is a large part of how you get such beautiful color variation in watercolor painting. But we don't always want that. We're gonna start this design by working with a little wet into wet, and then we are gonna finish this floral design by working with wet on dry technique. And that is just what it sounds like when we when we paint onto dry page or paint that is already dry. So I'm getting these beautiful tiny little blossoms that are all sort of seeping into one another. Oopsie, that's a weird leaf. That's okay. And then we'll come back and we'll add more detail. So we're just gonna work with very light, very, very light paint. And of course we have our initial area underneath already, so that kind of saves it too. If you have an area where you don't place these little blossoms close together like I've done here, it's fine, it's fine. There's already paint underneath, there's color there. You know what we need actually? We need to mix up a really, really dark saturated purple. Like not a lot of water in there at all, but some water. And then we can take that very dark purple and just place a teeny little bit, that was way too much, a teeny little bit in the center of these flowers. And you know what? It's probably gonna be better to do that once they've dried up a bit. And that is also part of the skill and the magic of wet into wet versus wet on dry, because you need to know when is the perfect time to add that little bit of dark saturated color in the middle. It was too soon when I did that right now. And you can see because it bled out, it was out of my control. That might have been good for something, but for these lilac blossoms specifically, I was too soon. So I will keep waiting. And once these have dried up a little bit more, then I'll add that saturated color right in the center. And that's gonna be so pretty. And that will help define each lilac blossom. And if part of the lilac flower gets a little abstracted as it is down here, that's okay. But we want some areas to be quite defined. All right, let's try this again. There has to be some areas where we can add that little stamen in the center or that little bit in the center. There we go. Oh yes. And you can see the difference between areas that are still slightly wet and areas that are dry, like this one where I'm not getting any movement of that paint. Ooh, I'm liking this. I'm liking this, you guys. There we go. I just feel like lilacs are so spring. It's the perfect time of year to start doing everything on a spring theme. There's still snow, at least here, still miserable, but indoors, it feels like time to start bringing all the spring flowers into the house and all that good stuff. Chris and I just got back from our trip to Paris, and then we were in Ontario visiting my family. My sister, we threw a bridal shower, and my dad had a big birthday. So we've been gone almost 6 weeks. And there's something, I know people in the Northern Hemisphere can relate to this. There is something about being away in winter. When you get back, no matter what time of year it is, even if it's like February still, it's just like, oh, it's practically spring. Time to get some daffodils and crocuses in the house. So we are really feeling the spring vibe this morning. We've unpacked and cleaned the house, and I'm just like, we need to go get some fresh flowers for this place. Let's come in with a bit of a larger brush and just see how that goes. Why not? I mean, this is so fun to paint. I hope you guys can tell through the camera. This is really, really just 1, 2, 3, 4, leave it, maybe dry your brush and then come back in and absorb a little of that pigment on 1 or 2 petals. And then we'll come back in a moment and we'll add that center. So that's it, all it is 1, 2, 3, very nondescript shapes. Dry the brush. Soak up some of the pigment, because a dry brush in watercolor acts as an eraser. All right, and then we get that pigment and we can add that to the center. Oop, and it was too soon. See, I teach you through my mistakes. Okay, that looks cute. Towards the top of this lilac, I can actually use, there's so much paint in my water at this point for the very, 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 very light areas. And you can see how I kind of switch back from the pinkish purple or the warmer purple to the cooler purple. And that's just going to get me a very nice variation of color. As I said, a real flower has beautiful variation of color, and that's what we want to go for today. And instead of removing pigment with your dry brush, you could also add a little pigment to 1 or 2 of the petals. Again, we're just looking for that variation. Let's get some more cool purple going here. You can also do a little stippling, and stippling, I sort of use that term very loosely, I think, on the channel, but stippling is, for me, is just anything that's dotty, anything that's loose. And I'll just go in with a bit of very light paint and kind of just drop it wherever I feel like it. And that helps with that lilac-y look as well. So you've got your underpainting with a little bit of variance in color and negative space. Then you've got your blossoms. Some are very defined, some not so much, although I do plan to fix up this area. And then you've got a bit of stippling here, which you're doing with very light paint. And that helps to, I don't know, does it help to abstract it a little, or does it make it look even more like a real lilac? Ooh, don't know. But I think it just is working for us, so let's do it. Now, one thing I'm watching for as I paint is you don't want all the petals on each blossom to be the same color. So a lot of these ones in here, all 4 petals look very much the same. So what I can do is I can go in and add a little extra color. And I can always use a clean, dry brush, or even just a dry brush, to pick up some of that color. As long as it's still a little damp, I can always remove a little. I can use it as an eraser. And that little variance, I think it just adds a lot to the lilac. And then of course I'll come in and I will just add that little dot in the center. And that just brings it to life, I guess you could say. Just need that tiny dot. Doesn't matter if it bleeds out or not. It may, if the paint is still wet. It may not if the paint is dry. But all we want is like a, whoops, that's the opposite of what we want. Okay. All we want is that little dot. We'll add one to there later when it is dry. I am feeling this, you guys. This is a good looking lilac. I hope you can tell that it's been just fun to paint this. It has not been stressful. It has not been, you know, a real tiresome subject. Comes together, I think, quite simply. I know sometimes you watch these videos and it can feel like, oh, I can do that. And then you go and it doesn't quite work out the way you had it in your mind. And I really know how you feel, because that happens to me every time I watch a photography or a videography tutorial. I'm like, oh, easy. And then I get into Premiere. I'm like, wait, what? The where? Where did that button go? Why don't I have that button? And it can be, you know, easy to blame the supplies and that kind of thing. But I promise you, there is no perfect brush or perfect paint. It really is just about, you know, doing it a little bit every day or every weekend, and you'll start to really get comfortable with your supplies and how the brush feels in your hand. You know what? I think this area is now dry enough that I can go in and add a little more detail, and that is exactly what I'm going to do. Okay. So as the flower begins to dry, as different areas begin to dry, what you can do is you can take a darker paint and come back in, and you can just add a little pigment to one petal or two petals. And that's, again, just helping to give that nice variance. And I think that makes it look quite real and quite like a lilac really does. Well, hopefully. And another thing is, as we fill in the space that we initially blocked out with our underpainting, you might want to add some flowers along the edges. So you might want to go over it a little on the edge so that it looks natural, like I'm doing here. We're going outside of our initial shape just to make sure that that we don't really see that initial part, and that it looks natural and like the shape is made up of all these little blossoms the way it would be in life. Here we go. Around this part, it kind of gets boring. Could have made a smaller lilac, maybe. Of course, then I would have had to do smaller blossoms. Okay, I'm gonna finish this, and then we will talk about leaves and stems and all that good stuff. As the painting continues to dry, I'll continue to add more details, and then I am going to mix up a brown and a green so that I can complete the lilac with a stem and a leaf. Okay, now at this point, it's not a horrible idea to take a pencil or a really light paint, depending how comfortable you are, and just kind of draw, where is that stem really coming from? I'm gonna have two little twigs sort of like that, and then a leaf coming down like that. It's kind of a larger area. So now I'm going to take a fine brush. Actually, I'm going to take my very fine brush, and I'm going to start by painting that brown stem. Oh, I'll go light to start, and I can add extra detail later. Stems are fun to paint because they are kind of a scraggly bit. The bark is uneven, so you definitely do not have to be perfect when painting those stems. You can just get a little paint on the page, see how it looks, and sort of go from there. Now, since I've marked out the shape of the leaf on the page, when I begin to paint, I can actually paint some detail right away. So I can actually move the paint the way that the veining on the leaves would move, because I know where I want that leaf to end. Does that make sense? Like, I've already got the perimeter of that leaf marked out, so I don't need to worry about that. And you can see how by adding the color, I'm also adding detail. And I'm just adding some more color sort of in and around the stems, and then I'll come back in and do some wet on dry and add some more detail right on top so that it looks like the stem is kind of going into this conical area. So to finish my piece, I am working on two areas, the leaf and those blossoms right at the bottom of the flower where it meets the stem. And I'm just working with a little bit of wet into wet and then waiting for those areas to dry so that I can add more detail with a wet on dry technique. And I just kind of keep going back and forth between the two and playing around and adding some detail, not a lot of detail. I'm still doing things very, very loose. And that is how I will finish up this piece. And there is our lilac all done. I'm super happy with that. As I said, there's so many variations for this. You could do a vase of lilacs, you could do more and more blossoms coming off this way and that, all those conical shapes, some smaller, some larger, and just have a lot of fun. It is quite meditative painting. I know I always say that, but there is just something about flowers and leaves. Those shapes are so familiar. So painting them is just fun and relaxing. And I hope you will give this lilac painting a try. Thanks for watching today, guys. I will see you soon with a new tutorial. And don't forget to subscribe.